A group that's called the Don't Shoot Coalition is hoping to prevent the kind of violence that Sarah was talking about from breaking out in Ferguson after that decision's handed down by asking that law enforcement adhere to some specific rules that are meant to demilitarize the police in Ferguson. The Ferguson police have met with the coalition to define, quote, some common goals. Joining me to talk about the coalition's proposed rules and whether they could help diffuse this potential powder keg are CNN's legal analysts Paul Callan and Sunny Hostin. First and foremost, that all sounds great when you see, look, this is terrific. The community, the police coming together to put together some kind of a plan. That sounds great. Until I read some of the proposed rules and I started to think, who's policing who? Hold on a second here. This organization has already said it's going to encourage civil disobedience, but at the same time, and let me just read a couple of the rules for you. Let's pop up the first few. It's recommending that 48-hour advance notice before the grand jury decision is announced. The police give the protesters this 48-hour advance notice. I'm not sure that's in the best interest of anybody because that just sets the stage for it to get really ugly and to get going earlier than maybe proposed. Pop up the next rule as well, and this has to do with how the police are going to be dressed. Police will wear only the attire minimally required for their safety. Specialized riot gear will be avoided except as a last resort. Crowd control equipment like armored vehicles, rubber bullets, rifles, and tear gas will not be used. We had places that were burned down. We had people who were injured. We had officers who had things thrown at them like full water bottles and some glass bottles, etc. How can protesters make these kinds of demands realistically when there is the potential for like the LA riots to break out? Paul, I'll start with you.
Well, you know, it's not unusual for when you have mass demonstrations for people to try to work out an agreement in advance. The marches on Washington, again, you know, civil rights marches against the Vietnam War, there was sort of a framework agreement that you'll be in certain areas and we're going to provide food and you know, just to try to keep it under control. That's a good idea, and I'm glad to see that there's been a start in this process. But some of these things, they're just, you know, they don't make sense and the police can't agree with them. I mean, I understand they want 48 hours notice before a grand jury indictment is announced. It has to be announced publicly at some point, so it's not illegal to do that. But is that going to increase the size of the crowd because they know precisely when it comes down? I'm not so concerned about some of the other ones that you spoke about, but there is a provision here at number 11. They want safe houses where people who theoretically have committed crimes can hide out and not be arrested by the police.
Let me read that. Safe houses shall be considered sacred ground and only entered by police when called upon or if extremely necessary. Look, there are criminals in these. There are bad elements who have come to these riots, and we've seen that. We've seen interlopers coming in and making trouble. Should we be giving them safe houses?
Look, I think that Paul is right, that this is a start, that this is appropriate. And I think that people protesting and trying to change some of the problems that have occurred is very American. We're talking about community activism. We're talking about community organizing. So this is something that I think we should embrace. I have looked at many of these rules of engagement that were proposed. I don't think that they are so off the mark, quite frankly, in light of the type of activity that we have seen from the police department.
Do you think they should be allowed to throw things at the police?
Well, I don't think
no, simple yes or no.
No, I don't think they're suggesting that, though.
They are. Police will be instructed to be tolerant of more minor law breaking, such as thrown water bottles, when deciding whether to escalate use of force.
I don't think that it's appropriate for some of the actions that we've seen from the police. The police.
No, but this is an action from the protest. They want to be able to throw water bottles.
Yes, Ashley. But again, remember what happened to our very own Don Lemon when he was shoved out of the way.
Don wasn't throwing water at anybody.
Remember what happened to many of the protesters that were peaceably protesting, which is their constitutional right.
And they earned it in court. They've earned that right in court.
Exactly. And so I think...
But throwing water bottles? They want the right to do that?
I'm not saying that that is appropriate, but I'm saying in light of what we have seen from this police department, the lack of transparency, all of these leaks, quite frankly, the way that they're handling this grand jury process, which is unfathomable and unheard of, these are the types of rules of engagement, quite frankly, and scenarios that we have to consider and we have to talk about.
Paul, is this the big list? I mean, this is a negotiation to come in real hard and hope to come back with, like, I don't know, half to three-quarters of it?
Well,
is that what this is? I can't understand being able to throw anything at a cop.
I don't know because, you know, 19, for instance, they're trying to have a agreement on bond and the setting of bail in these cases. Do you think a judge is going to say, well, all right, I'm not going to set bail in your case because you made an agreement with the cops? That's the judiciary. They're not going to agree to that. My point also is that the group doing the demonstrations in Ferguson is a big, diverse group. You may have responsible civil rights activists who sincerely want this to be nonviolent, to send a proper message.
The majority of the protesters
I don't know
nonviolent.
who's taken a poll on it, but I know that there are many others who have participated who are anarchists and who want to cause trouble with the cops. Not even from Ferguson. They're not going to be bound by this agreement.
I got to cut it short because we've got the White House coming down the pike here. But I want to keep this conversation going because you mentioned Don Lemon, and I was never more angry than seeing Don Lemon trying to do a peaceful report and being shoved and pushed with the
and that's why these types of rules of engagement are important,
Sonny,
actually, because you
water
have
bottle
to,
throwing,
but you have to consider all the scenarios.
You're going to agree with me, aren't you? You can't throw a bottle of water at a cop.
I would agree with that, but you have to also consider all of the scenarios and discuss
It's called the law.
All right, guys.
We already have laws.
Paul Callan,
that
Sonny
ban these
Hostin,
things.
fantastic, and you're going to have to be on the panel when all of this happens too. We're going to